Who cares?
Nobody's independent in the modern world. But do you think that we would be running to communist China the way that Mark Carney is?
Alberta is the only reason Canada works. That's not an opinion, that's math. 84% of Canada's oil comes from Alberta. 20% of the entire Canadian economy.
Oh yeah.
$32 billion a year flowing to Ottawa. Now imagine that stops. Imagine Alberta votes yes. 52% choose independence. The referendum passes. The separation begins. What happens to Canada the next morning? The Canadian dollar collapses before the results are even certified. 9% down before noon, 13% by market close. Quebec wakes up $13 billion poorer. The transfer payments that funded their health care, their schools, their entire social safety net, gone overnight. The Maritimes? They're on the phone with Ottawa begging for emergency funds. But Ottawa doesn't have emergency funds. Ottawa just lost 20% of its revenue. And here's the part that should terrify every Canadian watching. It doesn't stop with Alberta. Saskatchewan is watching. British Columbia is divided. And by the time Ottawa figures out how to respond, they might not have a country left to save. This is not speculation. The petition is live right now. Signatures are being collected across Alberta. The deadline is May 2nd. The referendum is October. Let me show you exactly what Canada looks like without Alberta, and why what's left might not survive the decade. Day 1. The market's open. Currency traders don't wait for speeches. They don't wait for official statements. They see the referendum results and they do math. Alberta gone means 20% of GDP gone. Alberta gone means energy exports crippled. Alberta gone means federal debt obligations concentrated on fewer provinces with less capacity to pay. So they sell. They sell everything with Canadian exposure. The Bank of Canada calls an emergency meeting by 9 a.m. Governor Tiff Macklem faces two options. Raise interest rates to defend the dollar, which will crush borrowing and trigger a recession. Or let the dollar fall, which will spike inflation and make every import unaffordable. He raises rates. It's the wrong choice, but there are no right choices anymore. By Friday, the Canadian dollar settles around 61 cents against the US dollar. That's a 20% decline from pre-referendum levels. Everything Canadians import now costs 20% more. Gas, food, electronics, medicine, 20% more expensive overnight. But here's what I need you to understand. The currency crash isn't the crisis. It's just the warning shot. The real crisis hits 48 hours later when the accountants finish their calculations. Let me show you a number the federal government has been hiding for decades. A number that explains why Ottawa will do anything, to keep Alberta from leaving. Every year, the Canadian government collects taxes from all provinces and redistributes them through a system called equalization. Provinces that generate more than they need send money to Ottawa. Provinces that can't cover their own expenses receive money from Ottawa. In theory, this balances the federation. In practice, it means one province has been funding everyone else for 50 years, Alberta. In 2015, Alberta's net contribution to federal coffers was $27 billion. By 2025, that number grew to $32 billion. That's $32 billion more than Alberta received back in services, every single year. Where does that money go? Quebec receives approximately $13 billion annually in equalization payments. $13 billion. That's almost 10% of Quebec's entire provincial budget funded by a province 2,000 kilometers away. The Maritimes collectively receive another $8 billion. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland. These provinces literally cannot function without transfer payments. Manitoba receives $3 billion. Even Ontario, supposedly the economic engine of Eastern Canada, has become a net recipient in recent years. Now imagine all that money disappears. Not gradually, not over time, overnight. This is the part nobody in Ottawa wants to talk about. Because the moment you see these numbers, you understand why they're so desperate to keep Alberta in Confederation. It's not about national unity. It's not about shared values. It's about survival. Without Alberta's money, Quebec faces a $13 billion budget hole.
But to go to a foreign country and to ask for assistance in breaking up Canada, there's an old-fashioned word for that, and that word is treason.
So that David Eby can't continue to hold us hostage? Of course not, because they want us to be held hostage. That Ontarians, for the first time in their lives, are going to have to pay their own bills and pay the bills of the Maritimes that we've been paying for years. I understand that's upsetting to people, but they need to understand that Albertans are done, we're leaving, and there's no more conversation to be had. I know that's upsetting.
Think about what that means. 10% of your provincial budget gone. Hospitals close, schools cut staff, infrastructure projects canceled, welfare payments reduced. Quebec's unions call a general strike within 2 weeks of Alberta's exit. Montreal sees protests that make the 2012 student demonstrations look like a picnic. The provincial government teeters. But here's what's worse. Quebec isn't even the hardest hit. Per capita, the maritime provinces depend on federal transfers more than any other region in Canada. New Brunswick receives roughly $4,000 per person in equalization. Nova Scotia is similar. Prince Edward Island even higher. When that money vanishes, these provinces don't face austerity. They face insolvency. Within 18 months of Alberta's exit, at least one maritime province will require federal bailout intervention. The problem? The federal government is broke too. This is what I mean when I say collapse pattern. It's not one thing breaking. It's everything breaking at once, each failure accelerating the next. Alberta leaves. Revenue drops. The dollar crashes. Borrowing costs spike. Credit ratings fall. More borrowing costs. Less investment. Less tax revenue. More borrowing. The spiral accelerates until something breaks completely. But I haven't even shown you the worst part yet. Because everything I just described assumes the damage is only financial. It's not. The strategic damage is even more severe. Let me show you the map Ottawa doesn't want you to see. The real resource map of Canada. When politicians talk about Canada, they talk about shared values, multiculturalism, universal healthcare, polite people in cold winters. They don't talk about this. 84% of Canada's oil production comes from Alberta. Another 12% comes from Saskatchewan. That's 96% of Canadian oil concentrated in two provinces. When Alberta leaves, Canada loses 84% of its oil overnight. If Saskatchewan follows, and I'll explain why that's increasingly likely, Canada loses 96%. What's left is a country that produces almost no energy, a country completely dependent on imports, a country with no leverage in any negotiation about anything. Potash. This is the fertilizer that feeds the world. Without potash, crop yields collapse, food prices spike, people go hungry. Saskatchewan has the largest potash reserves on Earth. Not the largest in Canada, the largest on the planet, more than Russia, more than Belarus. When farmers in Brazil and India and China need fertilizer, they buy it from Saskatchewan. If Saskatchewan leaves, Canada goes from agricultural superpower to agricultural irrelevance in a single vote. Uranium. Canada is the second largest uranium producer in the world, the fuel for nuclear reactors, the foundation of clean energy, the strategic resource that every major power is scrambling to secure. Guess where it comes from? Saskatchewan's Athabasca Basin, the highest grade uranium deposits ever discovered on Earth. If Saskatchewan leaves, Canada loses its seat at the table in every conversation about global energy. Now look at what's left. Ontario has manufacturing and financial services. Quebec has hydroelectric power. The Maritimes have fishing and tourism. That's it. That's the Eastern Canadian economy. Factories that depend on energy they no longer produce. Banks that manage a currency that's collapsing. Fish and tourists. Against this backdrop, ask yourself a simple question. Why would Saskatchewan stay? They share every single grievance Alberta has. The equalization formula that bleeds them dry, the federal regulations that strangle their energy sector, the Ottawa elites who lecture them about carbon emissions while cashing checks written with oil money. Saskatchewan has been watching Alberta's independence movement with intense interest. Premier Scott Moe has challenged Ottawa on jurisdiction for years. He's asserted provincial control over natural resources. He's fought the carbon tax all the way to the Supreme Court. And now Alberta just proved that leaving is possible. The petition process works, the legal framework exists, the public anger is real. All Saskatchewan needs is a spark. Alberta's referendum is that spark. Within 6 months of Alberta's exit, Saskatchewan's independence movement goes mainstream. 45% support separation in early polling. Not a majority yet, but momentum matters more than margins. And if Saskatchewan goes, what holds British Columbia together? Vancouver is liberal, urban, connected to Asian markets. The interior is conservative, rural, connected to Alberta. These two regions have been arguing about separation from each other for decades. If Alberta and Saskatchewan are both gone, northern BC has no reason to stay attached to Vancouver. The Peace River region, the Okanagan, the resource-rich interior, they'll start asking questions Ottawa cannot answer. One province leaving is a crisis. 2 provinces leaving is a catastrophe. 3 regions fragmenting is the end of Canada as a unified nation. Next, I'll show you exactly how this domino effect unfolds. Which provinces follow Alberta out the door, which provinces are left holding the debt, and what the map of North America looks like when the collapse is complete. Because this isn't about one referendum anymore. This is about a country discovering that the thing holding it together was never shared values. It was Alberta's money. And in 75 days, that money might be gone forever. So Alberta is gone. The referendum passed. The separation is happening. Now let me show you what comes next. Because what I'm about to describe isn't speculation. It's the logical outcome of forces already in motion. And it ends with a map of North America that looks nothing like the one you learned in school. The morning after Alberta's Referendum. Every premier in Western Canada holds an emergency meeting with their staff.
Oh, yeah.
To the people who support your movement, are you not kind of moving from one master to another?
The entire world runs on credit. How much does Canada rely on the United States? If Secretary of Treasury
you're pitching independence.
So what? If Secretary Besant wanted to end Canada tomorrow, it would take one memo to all of the bond rating agencies, Moody's, Standard and Fitch, and Poor's, to say that that Canada's a poor risk because of all the various things that the United States is going to do with Canadian credit, and Canada would be over. So Canada is being supported by the United States. So just stop with this silliness and trying to create this conflation somehow or other between the Alberta independence movement and being beholden to the United States. I know it's a fear-mongering talking point of the mainstream media with regard to Alberta independence, but we're not buying into it. It's ridiculous.
How many kids did you molest with Jeffrey Epstein?
More than just elbows.
Canada's broken because we're stupid.
I think it is extraordinary that Mark Carney has become the Prime Minister of Canada. He did a terrible job in Britain.